Is this a party that you recognise as a former chair of the Conservatives?
Good afternoon, Carol. I don't think it's definitely not a party that I recognise, but it's not a party that so many of my colleagues recognise. I've had colleagues on the phone over the last 48 hours just despairing. I had an very senior ex-cabinet colleague saying, they're just jokers. This is how bad it's now become. It's almost like we're watching a car crash in slow motion, and however hard we try and say stop, don't do this, it carries on happening. And of course, it's bad for the party, Carol. I'm not going to deny that. And of course, it concerns me that we are heading into a general election where we could effectively be wiped out for a generation. But what disturbs me more is the fact that this kind of divisive far right conspiratorial rhetoric is now in the mainstream. And this has real life consequences. If you look at the reports, if you look at the Home Office's latest data on religious hate crime, over 40% of it is targeted at British Muslims. And if you look at the report that came out last week, since the last 3 or 4 months, there's been a 330% rise in anti-Muslim hate crime. And 2 out of all 3 attacks, Carol, are against women, and usually visibly Muslim women, so women who may, for example, wear the headscarf. And I've spoken to so many people in the community now who are scared of going out. Some women who are scared of what the discussions that are happening in their workplace, who are scared of losing their job, who are scared that there's been a green light being given, that Muslims are somehow fair game. And what they say, quite rightly, is that if Sadiq's not off limits anymore, somebody as liberal and as inclusive as Sadiq Khan, listen, we have our political differences, but the one thing you can't question about Sadiq is the way in which he's trying to speak out for all of Londoners. He has a great relationship with Jewish communities, Hindu communities, Sikh communities. He's a big part of the LGBTQ scene. And what they're saying is, if he is now being treated like an extremist, and there are suggestions that somehow he and his extremist mates, inverted commas, have taken over London, then who else is there left? If Sadiq is seen as part of the problem, there is no solution. And what this is seen as is really an attempt to silence Muslims coming into public life. It's an attempt by some of my colleagues to say, look, this is what we do to Sadiq, and therefore it's stopping a new generation of British Muslims coming into leadership spaces.
I mean, all of which I completely agree with. When you talk about so many of your colleagues despairing, is that of the old party, for want of a better phrase, Sayeeda?
Yeah, it's part of what I call the Cameron Conservative One Nation inclusive party. There's no doubt, Carol, that we've had a history. We've all been part of it. I would hold myself responsible in that space as well, where we got equalities completely wrong. We have a bad history of racism. We have a bad history around LGBT rights. And David Cameron coming to the fore was all about this new, vibrant, inclusive understanding of today's Britain Conservative Party. He changed so many things. He changed the face of the party, the faces within the party. He brought in equal marriage. He brought in so many things to make us a modern, inclusive, liberal party. But unfortunately, we're not taking inspiration from that. We're taking, my colleagues seem to be wanting to toxify and destroy the Conservative Party in the way that Donald Trump has done to the Republicans in the United States. So it's full of lies, and it's full of conspiracy theories, and it's full of misogyny, and it's full of racism, and it's all that kind of nasty toxicity. And there are various versions of it now flying around my party, and whether it's, Robert Jenrick on the floor of the House, whether it's Suella Braverman in the Telegraph, whether it's Liz Truss, across the water in the US, or whether it's Lee Anderson and his comments on Sadiq. And what I suppose what shocks me in all of this is the lack of self-awareness, where only a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, we were quite rightly holding the Labour Party to account for anti-Semitic comments made by their candidate in Rochdale. And there were two things that we said. One, that it wasn't enough for him to apologise. He needed to no longer be the candidate. And yet today, what the Deputy Prime Minister has said is, well, had Lee Anderson apologised, it would have been no consequences and we'd just have moved on. So one set of rules for Labour, but actually another set of rules that we want to apply ourselves. And secondly, you'll remember the way in which we practically hounded anybody who was at that meeting where those anti-Semitic comments were made. And we said, well, you should have called those comments out. You should have said those comments were unacceptable. And here we have Liz Truss stood next to Bannon, who himself has a conviction for perverting the course of justice in the US, in which he's appealing, who's praising another convicted extremist, Tommy Robinson, and Liz Truss did nothing about it. So based upon our own set of rules and the way in which we expected Labour to behave, we somehow think that we don't have to behave in that way. And this kind of deep-rooted hypocrisy, which is now so apparent, actually, is what turns people off politics. Forget which political party you are. That's when people start saying, you're all the same. We can't trust any of you. And that's when democracy starts to be damaged.
That is exactly what people are saying. And you know, I said at the top of the show about, you know, supposedly waking up in this Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And it really, genuinely, Sayeeda, I know I'm older than you. And, and again, it's whether you agreed with Thatcher's politics or you could. This is just a whole new situation, and it's a really dangerous vibe about how politics is discussed now. And the people you mentioned, we talk about Liz Truss, we're talking about Lee Anderson, and much as he, many people on social media and so on, take the mick out of him, he was the deputy chair of the Conservative Party. And Liz Truss is a former prime minister. And these people have been fundamental within cabinet and making decisions on behalf of the country. I mean, Boris Johnson, again, he was another one who has been accused of Islamophobia in the comments that he's made in recent history. Where does it go from here, Sayeeda, with the Conservative Party? What happens? How does it change, or is it too late?
I think in the end, the way that parties change is when the electorate says enough. And, what I keep saying to my colleagues is you might think that this kind of dog whistle divisive politics might win you a couple of votes here and there. But, we're supposed to be serious parliamentarians, not the local pub bore. And that's what my colleagues are starting to sound like. The guy who props up the pub has had too much to drink and talks absolute rubbish and everybody gives them a wide berth, right? But instead, they're actually in the House of Commons having these conversations. And it's embarrassing and it's humiliating, Carol. The Conservative Party is the oldest, most traditional party. It's the one that's been the party of government the most. We are the kind of considered to be the party of sanity and establishment and sound money. And whatever, you may disagree or agree with the Conservative Party policies. But the one thing that you could absolutely hand on heart, I could always say, and remember, I'm a Conservative from the North who's campaigned in some really tough areas where the Conservatives are not particularly popular. But the one thing you knew was that we believed in democracy and we would protect it at all costs. We believed in the rule of law and we would protect it at all costs. And we were patriots, which meant that we protected our country. We unified people. We brought people together. We had evolutionary change. We were not radical, rabid racists who set our country alight, pitted community against community, and ended up creating unease. And at a time, Carol, when so many people are facing so many challenges, not least the economic challenges in their daily lives, what we can at least create is a backdrop, a country which is comfortable and at ease with itself, rather than this level of anxiety and tension that we're creating. We're there to keep our country safe, not to make it more unsafe with the rhetoric that we use.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time, Sayeeda. I really do appreciate everything that you've said, and I'm sure there are a lot of people listening who would agree with you. Maybe there are some who won't. But for now, thank you very much, Sayeeda Warsi.